Our show is brought to you today by Cave Day. Cave Day leads group focus sessions for global community every day on Zoom, which is perfect for writers. We all know how hard it is to make yourself set some goals, sit down, and hopefully hit that flow state where the characters start talking to you. Cave Day is here to help with that. I tried it, and I got to tell you, it worked great for me. I set out some goals, I went in for an hour-long sprint, and I not only got more work done than I expected to, it was better than I hoped for. Cave Day is like a group fitness class for your work. A trained guide leads check-ins, you do deep work sprints, and you take energizing breaks. Members report that they get 2 to 4 times more done with Cave Day's science-backed method. Join the world's most focused community and work alongside Emmy and Oscar winners. Writers Room listeners can get a 7-day trial and 50% off their first month with promo code WritersRoom at checkout. Head to caveday.org. That's caveday.org. Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Writers Room with Sam and Jim. This is the show where we bring aspiring writers into our little online podcasting writers room here and try to help them work on and develop their story. And we're going to do that with Ellie Lorscheid in just a minute. But first, Sam, I want to go off. I was thinking about how hard it is to break in, and I know a lot of our listeners are constantly looking for advice on how do you get a foothold in the writing world.
It's the hardest part of our business, I think.
It is, and we're senior writers now, and we always try to do what we can to help up-and-coming writers. And there's this persistent question of how should an up-and-coming writer approach an established writer for help, for assistance, for a job, for just advice about the craft, whatever that is. And I was thinking the other day, when we did the live show from South by Southwest with Ben Watkins, Ben said something really interesting about that. We didn't really dive into it on the show, but he said the thing he did when he was up-and-coming was he looked for ways to be helpful. He would know a writer was on show X about, cops, let's say. And if he saw an interesting article about police, he would forward that to them and say, hey, I know you've been working on this idea. I thought this might be interesting to you. And look for little ways just to be useful to that person without being a pest, without emailing them every week, but just to stay active in their world in a way that helped establish a relationship. And I thought that was a really clever approach.
It is. And the thing that we should say right up front is what you are doing will be completely obvious to the person you are doing it to.
Yes, it will.
Right? They know you're an aspiring writer. They know you are sending this thing saying, wouldn't you be interested in it? But the thing is, they were all aspiring writers too. And the fact that you are doing it in a way that is not obtrusive, is relevant, is not saying, please help me, please help me, please help me, and you're just being cool about it and adult about it, it's all right. It's cool. I mean, I like to be completely honest about this stuff because I'm worried about fakery.
Yep.
Something that, is an endemic, not just in our industry, and it is endemic in our industry. It's endemic. It's just part of a human interaction, and we're trying to get ahead in whatever business that we're in. And so JR is here, and JR is our producer, and he runs everything, and he edits, and he does that, and we do pay him some nominal amount. But the real reason he's here is because he wants to be attached with us, and we like JR a lot. And if we had the opportunity, we will undermine him at every.
Sell him out.
No, we will try to
throw him under a bus. Oh,
I made that joke. You can't keep making that joke.
I'm starting to worry for my safety.
No, we will help him. Not only because he helped us, but we only asked him to help because we thought this is a guy who can do what we do. And and so we would not have said, hey, can you help us? Because then we would have been indebted to him. And then we would have felt like shitheads if we had not followed through. So the idea of actually just being present, reaching out, and doing those kinds of things doesn't mean you're lying. And it doesn't mean the other guy or gal doesn't know why you're doing it. It's just smart.
Yeah, and there's that old rule that someone came up with ages ago that if you want to sort of ingratiate yourself or make a connection with someone who is more powerful than you, you should ask a favor of them. And I think that is completely wrong.
Right.
It's certainly it's a difficult approach with me, I know.
I never heard that. You should ask someone who's more powerful than you a favor?
Yeah, it's a thing. Ask them to do you a favor because then they feel a sense of obligation to you, and that's fine, except then they I feel a sense of obligation.
Wait, do you mean you should do a favor for them?
No.
Really?
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a
Wow.
thing. And you could see where it could work, but it's difficult, and I think it's especially difficult in this industry because what a more established writer can do for you is very limited depending on the circumstances. And you want a job as a PA or a writer's assistant is what you're asking for?
Mm-hmm.
There's 400 people in line for every one of those jobs in Hollywood, and other people who have first claim on getting you that job before me.
Right.
You want me to insert my it's all very tricky to ask those kinds of favors from people. Much better, I think, to follow Ben's advice and follow up on a contact by trying to be useful to someone. Mm-hmm. Then maybe you get to a point where there's enough of a bond that you can ask for something, or the other person might offer, hey,
that's the best scenario.
Right. I'd be willing to read something of yours if you have a script you'd like me to look at. I've got some time off. Boom.
Right.
There you go. That is a useful way to build a relationship.
Absolutely. It demonstrates intelligence. It demonstrates emotional intelligence, and it's somebody that maybe you want to hang out with, which is really the number one thing. And
because as writers, we are almost always in writers' rooms, and one of the key things you're looking for is this person someone I would want to hang out with in a writer's room day after day for weeks and weeks and weeks?
Especially when things get hard and a little shitty and things are blowing up. Is this someone that I'm going to be able to laugh with in that moment, rely on emotionally in that moment? Right. Because as junior writers, they're not going to have the skill set yet that is going to pull us out of everything. They might have good ideas, and I'm not saying they're not going to be great writers, but in the beginning, they're not going to offer as much as they will eventually offer.
Right. But if they're smart and funny and sensitive and emotionally intelligent, well, then they have a chance to make it. They might get someone to stick out their neck for them.
Which really begs the question, how the hell did we get here?
I have no idea. Sam, I want to talk for a minute about our sponsor, Cave Day. Cave Day leads group focus sessions for a global community every day on Zoom. You know how sometimes we struggle to get in the zone when we're writing?
No, I never struggle. I don't know what you're talking about. I do know something about procrastination, though.
We work at our computers, and we're bombarded with distractions all the time.
I'm sitting there struggling with some sort of dialogue or something's just about right, and then I get that phone call. You know what? The phone call might not even be that important, but in that moment, it feels important because I'm procrastinating.
I know, and I've been giving you grief about reaching for your phone for years, but it turns out that somebody has come up with a solution.
They're not taking away my phone, though, are they?
They don't have to. Cave Day works like a group fitness class for your work. A trained guide leads check-ins, deep work sprints, and energizing breaks. Members report that they get 2 to 4 times more done with Cave Day's science-backed method. I tried it, and I have to say, I was impressed. You're with a group of people, and you commit to each other that you're going to turn off all the distractions for the length of the sprint, just an hour at a time.
How actually did it work for you?
It worked great. I think just knowing that you're working alongside other people, even though you're all in your own individual caves, really does help keep you on task. But you have to put your phone out of sight.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's the catch.
Check it out. I think you'll like it. And so will our listeners. Join the world's most focused community and work alongside Emmy and Oscar winners, and me and Sam too.
Writers Room listeners get a 7-day trial, 50% off their first month with promo code Writers Room at checkout. Head to caveday.org. Again, that's caveday.org. It really works, everybody.
Okay, let's get into this week's show.
Hi, Ellie. This is Sam. Hello.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Ellie. It's Jim.
Hi, Jim. Nice to meet you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine all the way from Germany. Is that where we're talking to you?
Yeah, that's me. Hi.
Where are you in Germany?
I'm in Berlin, actually.
You know, we were just talking about Berlin last night. I was explaining
really?
the whole history of Berlin. I knew everything. No, I didn't. I knew the Wikipedia page. It's a long history. In the last 100 years, holy macaroni. That's what we were talking about.
Yeah, good and bad things.
What's happening now, though, is good television. How about that for a segue? Pretty good, huh?
Nice.
I feel like it's coming up. It's come a long way, and it's still going strong.
Yeah, and I know Netflix is strong there and Amazon Prime. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I keep seeing German stuff. I watch German TV.
Yeah.
With the subtitles, never the dubbed. Don't ever do the dubbed, people. So it's okay to read while you're watching TV.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you grow up with when you're like German watching American and British shows. You kind of get used to the subtitles.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. But didn't you learn English in school, or what'd you learn in school?
I started, I think, when I was in 5th grade. I started on English and French. Kept with the English more. I can't speak French now to save my life.
Now, we have one writer that we worked with, Matea, whose English is not her first language.
She's Croatian.
She's Croatian, and she did great. Have we worked with anybody else who English was not their first language? Well, we worked with some Canadians, so there's some discussion about that. But
American is not their first language.
American is not necessarily their first language. And we worked with some Americans who I think had some very distant relationship with English, but sometimes in a very good way, actually.
Depending on the day, my distance for English can be pretty good, too.
But what's your goal? Is your goal to write for German television or to write for American television, such as it is?
A little bit of both. Like, I feel more confident writing in English for some reason. Like, I feel like it's a little bit more removed, so I can be a little bit more honest because I have this, like, layer of protection, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting.
It being a different language, I do try to write in German, too, but I feel like I got more space to work when I'm writing in English, actually.
That's cool, but isn't that kind of like a confidence issue more than anything else? Because if you kind of if you suck in English, well, it's not my fault. I speak, it's not my mother tongue. And if I suck in German, then I just suck, right? Isn't that the problem?
A little bit. I'd like to say that my vocabulary is pretty much like the same. I think I can say what I mean to say in both languages.
Okay.
But in German, I kind of always feel like it's harder for me to get the language right so that it translates into a way that people really actually speak. That said, I'm not sure that I write English in a way that actually like is the way that people speak, but it's the way that people speak on television and in movies because that's what I grew up with.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. I will say this, though, right away. Most people write what they see on television.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd also say, like, I have a very hard time writing in German, too, so it's not just you.
It takes some practice, but I'm sure you get the hang of it.
There's very few writers I've read or worked with where I have a moment where I'm like, oh my God, this is actually how people sound. It's usually, I have a different reaction. For good writers I'm talking about, I have reactions like, wow, I never thought people could sound like that. That's really interesting that they sound that way. And sometimes it's people with ethnicities that I'm not fluent in. So I'm like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But I really think it's the actors that make it sound more natural, not the writing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I think writing is much simpler than we think it is, the dialogue writing. And it's certainly much simpler than I used to think it was when I was starting out.
We're always straining for levels of nuance that you're not actually going to get from the words. It's from the way the actor says it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I wonder about. Do you ever like cringe when you hear somebody say some words you wrote that you intended to sound differently and they just interpret it differently? Or are you like that's the process, that's the way it should be?
Occasionally, a lot of the times, we're fortunate that we've been in the writer-producer mode for a long time. We often get to go over and say, no, this is what I meant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
You kind of correct them like that's not going to accomplish what we need from the scene if you're having if you're that far off, right?
But just as often, we discover things when the actors discover it there. And we're like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I don't go over and say, hey, I wrote it this way, but you did it this way, and that is more interesting. Thank you for improving it. I may say later on, that was really great, but I don't. But I think it goes both ways. I really do.
It's almost always more interesting to me.
Yeah.
Right. Just hearing someone breathe life into it, because the thing about actors is they're just tracking their character most of the time. So they have a story for that character through the episode that has nuances that might not have occurred to us as the writers. But then they bring it and you go, oh, okay, sure. I see that.
That's the smart ones. I really think the dialogue can be simpler. And that's why I think people who speak English as a second language, even if they're really, really fluent, it's not, I don't think that's an impediment, because it's not about just, is it naturalistic dialogue. If it's simple, an actor can sell it. And by the way, next time an actor blows a line that I think is really simple, I will completely disagree with myself. I'll be like,
you'll be like, you want me to write it for you in German? Would that be easier for you?
Yes, I'm going to call Ellie Lorscheid, and then she is going to basically help us here.
I'm just going to translate it back, but that's something that I'll actually say. Like sometimes when I watch American shows that have like bits and pieces in German, I'm like, do you not have any Germans on hand?
Right.
I can tell you. Like it's LA completely out of German.
Well, that's sometimes that's what it takes, is to really separate yourself from the dialogue that much. And there are times when I want to apologize to actors because the line, whether I wrote it or I'm just producing it, someone else wrote it, and it's messing them up. And I was and I say, oh yeah, I can see how that would be a problem, and then we have to fix it on set. And that's probably the most useful thing that a writer will do on set is try to.
So you allow for them to like make it their own, to like change words around. Or are you really like, that's the words I want them like this?
It depends on who the showrunner of the show is.
Aaron Sorkin was notorious for like, you will change nothing.
Right.
Everything is exactly as I wrote it, and actors signed on because he's Aaron Sorkin.
Right. I also think, the clock is ticking, and if an actor can't do the line, let's find another line that they can do that means the same thing, because the dialogue is less important than the moment. And that's what we're really writing, is a series of moments. And when Jim and I, when we're breaking a scene, if it starts to be too much dialogue and we're trying to accomplish too much in the dialogue, then we probably haven't nailed the scene yet, because we haven't found that moment and how to express it with what the actors are actually doing, which Jim and I both know when we get to the set, that's what the actors want to know, is what am I doing? Why am I walking from there to there?
Right.
Which I will tell you right now, until I was on set in the first season of Haven, I did not really understand that.
And sometimes the actors do just get it wrong. I remember when we were working on Crisis years ago, being on set with Dermot Mulroney, and there was a line I had written that he was struggling to get it out. And I said, look, I can rewrite this. I can rework it so it's easier for you to say. And he said, what I don't understand is this. And I don't remember what it was, but it was some idea inside the sentence that he was reading in a way you could read it a different way than I intended. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. No, that's my fault. Like, I can rewrite it. He's like, no, I understand it now. It's fine. The problem wasn't the words. I just didn't understand it.
And I think that's an exceptional actor or writer or executive or producer who can say, oh, I missed it.
Right.
And now I get it. Nothing needs to change.
A lot of people never want to admit that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. That's always a personal grievance of mine, because we get things wrong all the time.
Yeah.
But this is the long way to saying, Ellie, dialogue is very fluid and very simple, and I think a lot of people can write it much better than they think they can if they let it just be simple. So let's talk about what you want to write. What tell us about your show. What is it? Is it an hour long? Is it a half hour? What is it?
My show is an hour-long, kind of YA fantasy retelling, but a modern fantasy retelling of the story of Hades and Persephone, this Greek myth of the goddess of spring and the god of the underworld kind of coming together. But I'm moving away from the very old version of it, where Persephone is without agency and is lured or kidnapped into the underworld and forced to be the queen of the underworld and Hades' bride. But she actually has a lot of agency, and she makes her own decisions. And it's set in this fantasy world, 2 dimensions, where she lives in like the middle one, and then there's the other dimension, which is the underworld, and they are at war with each other. And she has been taken as a gifted child. She's been taken in by the military. And
hold on. Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you for just a second.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Ellie. But let's talk about that myth just for a second, or that story. So at least we understand what the foundation is. So talk about the story. I know this because I have a daughter who's a fanatic about mythology. But tell us the story of Hades and Persephone. Briefly. Okay,
so originally there's a couple of versions of this myth. The original myth was that Persephone is the daughter of Demeter. I don't know if you pronounce it like this in English.
Demeter.
There you go. She's her daughter, and she is a young, beautiful half goddess, and she's like walking the earth with her mother, who is the goddess of fertility. And then Hades on the other side, and in the underworld, he is the chaperone, so to speak, of the underworld. He's been chosen to guard this realm and see that the souls are like put in the right place after they die. And so he's kind of lonely down there. And he actually decides that he wants Persephone as a bride. And then there's a couple of different ways that the myth goes. Like, some say that he asked Zeus for permission to get Persephone and to like lure her into the underworld. There's other versions of the myth where she goes walking around the beautiful meadow, tries to pick a flower, and then the flower takes her to the underworld. Hades traps her in there, and he makes her his bride by force. Demeter gets really, really angry, and she goes on a rampage to try and get her daughter back, but she can only get her back for a half of the year.
That's great. And all the variations of that, they don't matter, because it's really the one that you're picking, right? And I think it's great to base something on a myth. I mean, that's an easy way to understand it. It's just really simple, and now not everyone knows Hades and Persephone, and of course Persephone, she comes out in spring, and when she's gone, it's winter.
Right. When she returns, her mother has such joy that fertility returns to the world, and everything's beautiful, and you get spring and summer.
Right. So there's thematic stuff here too that can be mined, and this is great. Okay, so you've got this cool story.
And before you get into her specific story, I'm curious to get just a little background on these two dimensions, as you said, the two different worlds here, and they're at war. I think that's all awesome. How do the two worlds feel? Like, is Hades, is that world like actually a land of the undead kind of thing?
The way I put it, the Midlands, so like the world where Corey and the humans live, is very modern. Like it's even post-modern from what we have today. I'm thinking more like cyberpunk-ish in a way. So really, really modern. Okay. And then the Underworld is like a dark mirror of that. There's no technology. It's very bare.
But is it populated? It's populated by humans?
It's populated by the souls that are trapped in there.
Yeah, but what are them actually seeing? I think Jim is saying, what are you seeing? When you're down in there, do we see buildings and we see people and we see that? I understand that they are souls and this is that. What
right.
do we see?
Does it feel like, souls coming over to haunt people and that's what the war looks like? Or are they just people living in this alternate reality that is dark and dead?
So there's Hades' underlings, so to speak, like his army. They are like goddesses and gods that appear normal. They're just all kind of ageless and they're like the normal, regular things. But there's a lot more sinister things going on. So there's these kind of like monsters, which we'll learn later on are like these trapped souls that cannot advance and pass through a cycle of rebirth to like cleanse themselves and become better. So they are trapped in the underworld and they like fester into these monsters that roam this land.
So this is very much a case of you're living in the magic of there are dead souls, there's the living world, and the world of the dead and the spirits not yet reborn, and Hades' lieutenants are at war with the world of the living to some extent. And it sounds like there are gods and goddesses present in this world to some degree too, right?
They used to be. That's kind of the crux of it. Like there used to be the third realm, which was the god realm, which was originally in my lore the only realm that there was. But then they got bored and got greedy and got corrupted. And so they decided on like a punitive system in which Hades came to be the lord of the underworld. This system was designed so that there is this middle world where the goddesses and gods get to have like their vices and do their thing and enjoy stuff, and then go into the underworld to like pay for what they did and circle through the world again and again, kind of like karma,
right,
to return to the god world when their souls are like cleansed and they've got everything greedy and nasty out of their system. But what happened is that the few gods who achieved this settled into their god realm and enjoyed what they had there and died in the collective mind of like the middle world, which through this process became very human. They essentially believe that the gods are dead. So the only thing that's left is the middle land and the underworld.
Okay, so not really gods involved other than Hades. There's just really the two worlds we're living with.
Yeah, that's what we're going to start out with. The other gods will come into play later. Like that's kind of like the big overarching mythology there.
All right, so let's keep it simple. I think that's what we had to do, Ellie, because this stuff is really dense, hard to understand.
Yeah.
It might really cause you to be tripping all over stuff while you're creating. Yeah. Ultimately, we want the simplest version. Like, I was thinking about Constantine, right? And in that movie, he went to the underworld, but it was this animated, insane place. Right? That was also, I think, a city. It was like a ruined city, if I remember right. And he didn't spend a lot of time there because it's actually more terrifying to have those creatures come into our world than it is to go live in there the whole time. And I wonder if that's what you want to do. And that's why I was just saying, what does it look like? Because other than all the rules and all that kind of stuff, I don't need to know that to understand the pilot. I just need the pilot will help me understand them.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm struggling with the regards to the pilot, because I'm not really sure where to end it on. Originally, my plan was to have it end on Corey crossing over into the underworld, where essentially her part of the story takes place in the underworld, a typical hero's journey that she undertakes. What I'm struggling with is figuring out if I want to introduce everything and put a bit of the lore and the world building in the first episode and end it on this big, there's this vast, dark, scary place, and then we're going into episode 2, or if I need to get her there earlier.
I think one of the key questions here is how many episodes is this? Is this like a limited series? Is this a 50 episode? How long do you see this running?
I thought the basic one season would be around 8 to 10 episodes and then maybe run for 3 seasons.
Okay.
So it's a full,
Yeah.
it's an
Full-on
ongoing.
series.
It's ongoing.
Because I ask that because I think putting your lead into the underworld and having all her trials take place there kind of pulls her out of the frame of reference that the audience can mostly appreciate, right?
Yeah.
And feel sympathy with.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit of a challenge. I guess maybe we should talk about the pilot story a little bit.
And let me start by saying, I'm sure this is true for other people who are listening. I'm drowning already.
Right. Who's your main character? What does she care about? And what pulls us into this story in the pilot?
And the reason I mentioned that, and that's yes to what Jim was saying, but the reason I mentioned that is I'm feeling that way, and I just had to listen to it for 1 minute. But you, Ellie, have been living in it for a while, and that must be hard. And that, and so what we need to do is cut that stuff loose, right? So we can do a television show, and this is a good example of how backstory and all that stuff can really get in the way. We also need it. We also need it. So
right,
it's
you need answers for the questions when they come up, but then you don't want to say anything about it until those questions do in fact come up.
Right, exactly. All right, so let's hear about the pilot story, just in a loose way.
So Corey is very idealistic young soldier. She is the star pupil of this academy that she got drafted into when she was just a little girl, raised by this general who kind of stepped in as her father figure because their own wasn't there.
What's his name?
His name is just the general. It's a very weird relationship between kind of fatherly and very restrictive and very stern and not really emotional, but she kind of clung on to this and she became this very goody two-shoes, dutiful girl who was a very buck-wild child, but she's gotten very used to like rein herself in, like emotionally, temper-wise, and also the true powers that she has.
All right, so she has powers. Do we know this from off the top?
Yeah, right now I'm starting with her as a kid, where she learns her powers from her mother. She can raise plants from the dead. She's also super powered, like she's also super strong and super fast, which is the kinds of powers that the military wants her for. So she really learned how to only be this perfect little soldier that they wanted her to be.
And she is, I assume, extremely exceptional in this way, right? There's not a lot of people running around like her who can do all this stuff.
There are others like her, like she's in this battalion of other gifted children, so to speak, but she's the only one who can switch between dimensions.
Okay, so let's just go to the sort of top of the actual story. What does she want?
She wants to save the world. She wants to bring everything back together. Her kind, so these powered people, they are being treated very badly. And Corey says, I have to do this first. I have to fix our world so that once this is fixed, we can also live a normal life. Like we can go back to what we had before.
Can we simplify that?
Yeah. How do we see this? How do we learn this? What are the first beats of the story that give us a sense of...
Yeah, and why does she want to fix the world is my other big question. Who cares?
Well, what do we see of the world that makes us think it's broken? What's the start of the story?
So the start of the story is Corey learning some bits of her magic from her mother. And then you realize that the village that they live in has been overrun with these shadow demons from the Underworld. They are breaching into this village and the military comes in. And then Corey, as a 10-year-old child, gets taken in by the general. And he explains to her that these evil demons are trying to take over their world. And if they succeed, then nothing will be left.
What happens to her mother?
Her mother gets taken into, it's not an encampment, but it's like this part of the town where the people who lived in the villages get taken to.
Let me interrupt you for a second, Ellie. So this is, what's a good scene in here? Have you written scenes for this stuff yet?
Yeah.
All right, give me one scene that kills. Because right now with that stuff that you pitched is like 4, 5, 6 scenes minimum, maybe more.
The opening scene, I was thinking, starting with Corey on a tree, and she just flings herself down. She catches herself with her own powers, and you see this child just flying through the air, so gifted and so free. And then her mother kind of catches her, and then it's boom, the village is on fire. There's shadow demons. And then there's this child who is so terrified, seeing this through the eyes of a kid, going from being totally free to being absolutely afraid.
So you like her sense of freedom. Is that the piece that appeals to you? And then the loss of that freedom? Okay.
Exactly. The loss of that freedom and trying to become this perfect, flawless machine.
So that's not a great scene. I'll just say it that way.
Okay.
Let me explain why, though. I hate to say that just baldly, but I'm just going to say it's hurting you to have a scene like that. Because, first of all, it's introducing 2 ideas. One is young woman, girl at this point, has her supernatural power. That's a huge thing. And then there are demons invading the town. That's a huge thing. And but by taking both of them and putting them into one scene, you don't have the ability to enjoy either one, to really squeeze the juice out of either one. It's not that it's impossible, and maybe there are people listening who are like, dude, that's totally great. That's the turn. The demons come, But I actually think I don't really learn very much about her. It's just that she enjoys flying. And but I don't know much about her past that.
Right, and if you're it feels like in the larger story you're telling, she's been raised by the general, which is why I asked about the mom, because it feels like, well, her mom must die or in some way be forcibly separated from her in whatever this attack on the village is. So that opening scene that Sam's talking about, you kind of want some sort of, you want to see the bond between her and her mother, and maybe her mom is teaching her, explaining her some stuff, and you go, oh, her mom, like somehow being super is kind of normal in this world in some way that people can deal with. Okay, as a viewer, I can absorb that, right?
Well, let's pitch a scene to her. Let's pitch a scene that would demonstrate exactly what you're talking about.
She tries to jump out of the tree, or she's afraid to jump out of the tree, and her mom has to coax her and get her to trust her, and it turns out she can.
Okay, I bet you that. All right, let me build on that. Yes to that, and let's make it even weirder. Her mom there's a picnic basket, and they are flowers in their hair, and it's mothers and daughter love, and that she's beautiful. They're both beautiful, fantastic, and they go to the top of the cliff or whatever it is, and they spread out the picnic basket, and then her mom
shoves her off
the cliff.
Yeah, great.
Right? You know what I mean? And
yeah, like a baby bird.
That's
like a baby bird.
That's right.
And so, obviously we can beat this if we put some time, but that already, that's your turn. That is the scene. Because now we stay with her as she's falling, and she's traumatized, she's betrayed, and she's going to die.
But then she finds her confidence.
Or then she has no choice. Forget about the confidence. She finds her skill because she's going to die, and she flies, okay? And that's the scene. That's the way I would approach these things, which is you're trying to get, and I may be wrong about this, by the way, Ellie, don't hesitate to tell me I'm full of shit, but you're trying to you're like trying to lay track instead of creating really dynamic moments, right? Because and the moment that is most important in this scene is not her flying. It's her mother loved her enough to push her.
Right, and this is the biggest downfall of sci-fi fantasy, big world-building scripts. It's the hardest thing because you have all of this stuff about the world that is not quite like our world that you need to explain to people, and you want to get that out, right? You want people to understand your world, but you can't let that get in the way of the fact that that's not story. No one cares about that stuff. They care about her and her mom, and their home is being attacked. That's the story that is true regardless of how all the details of the story.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to cling to is the actual emotional arcs of what's happening to your characters, what they want, why they want it, what's been taken from them, what they're fighting for. That's what the audience cares about. All the other stuff's just cool stuff.
Right. And I can sense, and you're doing that thing, and we want to protect you from yourself.
Yes, so. We've made all these mistakes several times.
Yes, several hundred times, and will again, because it's our natural inclination is to, I thought of something really cool. Like when you were telling me and I said, what's the myth of Hades? And you started telling me not just the myth, but then all the sub-myths. Well, you can do it this way, you do it that way. I don't care about that. I'm just a dude asking you what the myth is, right?
Yeah.
And when I'm turning on
it simple.
Yeah,
right.
man.
Hades saw a beautiful woman and he wanted her in his world, so he kidnapped her, and that made her mom sad, so the world died, and they had to figure out how to get her back because they needed spring and crops and life.
That's basically it. And the way a tool to do that, to be interesting, or not be interesting, to write scenes that are automatically interesting, for me as a test sometimes is, all right, you have all the stuff and you got plot and you got all the stuff, try to write the scene. And if you can't write a scene that makes you excited, you may not have what you think yet. It may be too much. You may be asking yourself to stuff in all this kind of stuff, and you end up with generic scenes because you're just trying to get through it. I'm sure you know this, but Dune is coming out in, October, I think, the movie. And I picked up the book because I haven't read it since I was in high school, and I wanted to pick it up and read it again. And it's really hard to get into because the book was written in 1965. And he is jamming as much stuff into that first 10 pages where you are just like trying to, you're like a snake trying to swallow an alligator. I mean, it just takes a lot. But once you get into someone tries to kill Muad'Dib and they kill the Timothée Chalamet character who Timothy's going to play him in October, I'm in, because now it's a murder thing, and
Yeah.
and I care about him and his mom and all that kind of good stuff. It meant something to me. That's the moment I got in, and I'm sure everyone can argue about where they came in. But it wasn't the world. It wasn't the spice, and it wasn't the worms, and it wasn't the suits, and it wasn't all that stuff. It was just that moment, right?
Yeah.
And
I just feel like that's like the crux of fantasy in a way, to like get in the world building and the exposition. At what point, like, where do I go in with all that lore?
Here's the thing, like if you look at like a hero's journey approach, right? If you want to follow that kind of track, you've got a character, you want to see them in their basic world, and then something happens they're called to adventure, right? That they reject, right?
Exactly.
But what you're doing is seeing that character have the life that they have, whatever it is, before the call to adventure happens. And in that life, they're invested in things. They care about things. They have passions. There's people they love. They have friends. They have parents. Whatever it is that fits your world. And your story needs to live in who that person is. And ideally, we're learning something about them. You know, they're really afraid of using their power to fly because the last time they flew, their mom got killed by demons, right? You don't know that yet, but like they're pushing back against it. And then suddenly demons are attacking the village that they're in now, and they have to fly if they're going to save the people they love. Whatever it is, now it's a character trait. And you're learning things about the world because your character is being pushed to do things or confront things that reveal this bigger mythology that you want to talk about.
And what we don't, what we want to avoid is sequences where like, oh, I've got to go meet in the village. I've got to go meet the healer, and I've got to meet the math teacher, and I got to go meet the chief. And we just sort of have them go from A to B to C so that at least we can see those people, and then they have value for when we actually get the story going. But we can't do that, because the scenes themselves have to be character-based, and they have to be interesting on their own, and dynamic and filmic and all those things. And it is a tall freaking order. So I don't want to say to you, Ellie, that this is easy what we're saying. We struggle with this on every script, especially when we world build.
Step one is to put yourself in the shoes of that main character and establish their world and what they love and what they want and what they need. And then you put them in a dilemma. Then you screw up their world, and the old writing trope is you get your character into a tree in Act 1, and then in Act 2 you throw rocks at them, right? You just cause more problems. And in TV, Act 2 lasts essentially forever, for as long as your show,
series,
with little ups and downs along the way, right, where you resolve things as you go episode by episode. And your world will reveal itself as you need it, right? You're going to learn who Hades is when he shows up, or when one of his minions shows up. Like, you don't need that, Google Earth view of your mythology. What you need is street view. You're in that person's shoes. And all you can see is that storefront across from you. Oh, wait, there's a demon face in it. What does that mean? Right. I don't know. I'm very curious and worried as an audience member.
And as a character. And as a character.
Right.
We're in that person's face.
So it would make sense to just have her go through this journey in the pilot and not introduce the whole underworld in the first episode, but rather go down, this is Corey, this is her story, this is how she was taken in as a child and raised to be this person that is now in the tree.
One of the things you're doing, and it's sort of the classic as a writer as you conceive things, you start at the beginning, right? And you talk all the way through everything. That may not be helping you. It might be much better off just meeting Corey, and she is on a field training exercise with these other special people, right? She's already grown up. We'll learn all that other stuff about her mom and a demon and villages and, shadow demons invading. All that stuff will come out whenever it makes sense to come out. But what's her story here and now, and what's happening that is changing her life?
Right.
That's funny, because I actually started this second place where we meet her is like after she's a child and she's being taken. The next thing we know is that she's on a field exercise. Like, she's actually in the woods running with her fellow battalion. So that's exactly what she's doing. And
the question is, why did we need to see the town be attacked by shadows? What do we come away with thinking there? We don't know, right? And if, God forbid, the general tells her, I need you for all this and all of this. We have a war coming, and that's the beginning of a big, probably crappy, high-budget, overly long movie that you don't really want to see, but you end up watching it because you smoked a bowl and it's now 10 o'clock and you're like, it's free on HBO Max. I'm just going to watch it anyway. That's that kind of movie. You know what kind of movie I'm talking about? Where it's just...
Yeah, the Sunday morning one.
Oh, Sunday morning you're having a ball watching those movies.
All right.
That's
Wake and bake.
Yeah,
there you go.
She's got no kids, no spouse.
I don't know how to say that in German.
I miss those days. But anyway, the point is, yeah, those are the movies that are by the numbers, lay everything out. It's a whole epic tale. It's the start as a kid. This happened, and then we keep going. And the problem is we've seen it too many times.
It's hard to make it fresh and interesting and engaging.
Right.
The movies can live in plot. Those kinds of movies live in the plot structure, and that's what pulls you through. In television, it's the characters that pull you through.
Right.
What you need to do is get people to buy into your character and be interested by them, love them, hate them, feel something emotionally for them, hopefully sympathize them with that character enough that whatever happens to them in that first scene or very quickly into the second scene, you want something to happen that upsets their world or starts to open up that character to us so that we understand more about them.
Like, let me pitch you, because I still don't know what this show feels like. That's a problem too, because you spent some time, going through the numbers. But what's her name again? Corey. She's on a train.
Corey.
Right. She's on a train. I get to see this place, the city that she lives in. And it's not second world. It's this world, right? That's where she lives. She lives in this world, whether it's 20 years in the future or not. And she's on her device. And then these, bad guys come on the train and they start beating up the old lady across from her. And she chooses not to get involved. I'm already interested now, okay? And it's nothing to do with superpowers. And then they take the stuff from the old lady or the old couple, and she gets off and ignores them. And that's surprising because I thought that was my hero, but it's not, right? And then the next scene is the guys are walking down the street, and she then uses her suit. She then shows up, and she's slacker. She's kind of got a Jessica Jones vibe, and she kills all three of them, or she does terrible things to them. You know what I mean? It helps me stay in there. Or I stay with her, and she's walking down the street, but she can't. She wants to avoid it. She doesn't want to get involved, but she has no choice, and she turns around, and I get to see her struggle, right? And these are all...
Yeah, I see more the struggle in that she actually doesn't do anything because the people who took whatever they took from the old lady are the people that she works with. Like, they are the people who do this to the old lady because the old lady is at fault in their view, and that's the view that she adheres to. So she is doing straight off the bat something that you'd think is morally wrong, but she thinks is very justified because she's in this.
Well, that's interesting. That's very complicated, but very
surprising.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then it's
I don't know how I know any of that, right?
It's going to take a couple scenes, right? You got to come out of her inaction and go to then seeing her unite with those guys who beat up the old lady, right? In some context back in the barracks or whatever, and have some scene about why she kept her head down, even though it angered her or whatever it is. Like, there was some reason. Well, then I might sympathize with her keeping her head down if I understand that she's on the outs and everybody else thinks this way.
Yeah.
Say.
You see, we're trying to surprise you, and even though these are all the kind of the shitty version, I just want to be clear about that. It's not, but we're trying to surprise the audience and stay in her point of view the whole time, even if we don't understand exactly what's going on. Right. Because you have a certain number of cards that you want to turn over. In this, and you can't and shouldn't turn them all over, because what will happen is the same thing that happened when you first started talking, which is not only did I lose track, but I started to get bored because I lose track. And that's our challenge as writers, is to keep the audience engaged and guessing and in it and giving a shit. And if it doesn't serve that, it's only serving your need to get your backstory out, which is actually making it harder for you to write, not easier.
Right. You just want to raise questions, right? Why didn't she defend the old lady? In the next scene, answer the question. Oh, and now I've learned something about this character. I've learned something about this world. I understand things, and now the world's getting built for me. But it's being built because it's been revealed to me in story. I've gone looking for an answer and turned to the card myself, in a sense, as an audience member. The story has turned the card rather than the writer turning the card.
All right, Ellie, I'm sorry, we've messed you up so much. So
no, that's fine. I absolutely welcome it, because that's what I was struggling with, to really find an end to this. And I felt like I had to do, literally I was thinking about, do I really have to do the narrative route? Do I have to go with narration and really or is there another way? And I really like this way more because it doesn't feel as paint by numbers, as you said.
I'll give you a quick example. On Netflix, hopefully in Germany also, is a show called Warrior Nun. That's a good example of getting out a complex mythology through story, right?
In the pilot.
If you watch that pilot episode, you learn a lot of things, but you learn it because people are fighting and arguing, and it comes up in an emotionally dynamic way that you eventually get pretty much everything you need to know out of the pilot. You walk out of it with a pretty clear understanding of what the whole show is and the world is, but it's given to you in a way that feels like story rather than exposition.
And you don't know what the hell's going on for the first, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes.
And that's fine.
And that's totally fine because I know the character's scared and she's worried on the run and she's dealing. In fact, she doesn't quite know, if I remember right. But it helped. I'd like to propose that you're on a battlefield. You're killing a lot of demons, but the demons is the mythology that you have to kill to get out of your own way.
You are a warrior writer.
Yeah.
Warrior writer. So give us a thumbnail of the whole pilot as you see it and where you end, because that's where we started this conversation where you were like, I want to end here. Don't tell us any scenes anymore. Just sort of like, what are the 5 or 6 big beats that happen in the pilot?
So originally it was Corey gets taken in by as a child. Corey is a soldier that goes into an experimental treatment to be able to switch dimensions. She nearly dies on the table, and she then, by the end, comes out alive, able to switch dimensions at will and switches into the underworld.
That's the end of the pilot?
Yeah.
Why does she need to go to the underworld?
In order to get a path to Hades' lair so she can let the military through so they can defeat him in his own realm.
Let me throw this out at you. What you just told me was plot, though. That's not the story of the pilot. That's the plot. What's the story of the pilot? And if you don't know, that's totally cool. But do you know what the story is?
Through the lens of your character, what does she want in a few big beats that happens to her?
This is the beginning of her adventure. Like the story of the pilot would be, the way I envision it would be, this is where her journey begins to actually fulfill her mission.
Yeah. Okay. So so let's help you with that for a minute because you will never be able to write that. Because a kinder way to put that is that part is undercooked. And you're going to be writing reams of story, of plot, frustrated because you're not understanding what her story is. And so I'll give you a pitch on her story, right? The simple story is, this is a woman that has been so pained by something that happened to her before all this started, that she has tried to withdraw from society. And she's now in this, and all she wants to do is be disengaged from all of this. But she keeps getting pulled in. And the reason she gets pulled in by the military is because she is loyal to one man, the man that saved her life, maybe the general, right?
Yeah.
Until the end of the pilot, when we realize, maybe she does, maybe she doesn't, that he has betrayed her, right? Or he is taken by the underworld. And for the first time, she has a reason to go to the underworld to save him.
I'm going to pitch you a slightly different story.
Please do, because I don't think that was good.
Okay. Off of the Persephone thing, she's not Persephone. She's Persephone's daughter. And what happened when she was a child is Hades came and claimed her mom. And her world has gone downhill and gotten darker ever since. And she has this bit of magic, and her mom's been missing from her life, which is how she got trapped living, with this general and going through all this stuff. And what she discovers is that she needs to go and reclaim her mother from Hades. It gives her a personal stake in what's happening. She wants to find and be reunited with her mom. You have a reason to tell those flashback stories with her mom and the last time she saw her at some point when that comes up. But you have a character who has a need and has a drive. And there's a reason she is disconnected or that she's passionately connected to things.
Well, let me ask you a question then, Jim. I think that's a start. But then my question would be, what has the absence of her mother done to her? What is that? How has that affected her?
And that's the question, right? Is that why she's disconnected? Is that why, it could be she finds out the truth from this general in this episode that, this entire war is really all about your mom.
Right.
Right. And she didn't understand these things, that her mom was Persephone, right? You can choose to work in your mythology in that way, and we will understand Corey's need and drive because it's simple, right? She wants her mother back. It's a very basic human drive.
Yeah. I still think we need to see what her how that damaged her.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's who she is on the page.
Right.
That's interesting because that would kind of flip the original myth on its head. So it wouldn't be Demeter like looking for a daughter. It wouldn't be a mother looking for a daughter. It would be a daughter looking for a mother in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and maybe the myth has evolved because Demeter went up to the god plane and hasn't come back in a long time. So Hades thought he could keep Persephone now.
For Pete's sake.
And it's the daughter has to go get her out.
No,
that's simple. That's very small. Very small. You don't have to exposit that stuff. But you're living through the life of a young woman who's a soldier. She's got trials. There's whatever the battles are that's happening, and she's been raised by the general. This is her world, and that's what I think a lot of the pilot's going to be about, is her living in this world where there's demon incursions that she's training for and she's fighting with her friends. There's people she cares about. There's people who are her enemies, maybe. That's the human part of the story, and that's the framework on which you're going to hang this other stuff when it comes out. That, oh, shit, that's my mom in hell. Oh, I have to go undergo this operation so I can transition between worlds and go try to save her. All that stuff, right?
Yeah, it needs the underlayer of the whole thing. Why does she want to go in the first place? Why does she need to?
That's your actual story.
That's your actual
how
story.
It's her life, and forget all the other stuff. It'll come up when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be in her shoes, her life as she's living it here and now, and then how you're doing the pilot in this moment in her life, because this is when everything changes, right? When stuff starts coming out, the demons are hunting her, or the general tells her the truth about her mom, and that's why she has to go have this operation. Whatever it is, that's your story in your pilot.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that may feel backwards, or not. It may feel like you've been focusing on this other stuff so much that you're going to want to hold on to it. And I caution you, don't hold on to it. All right.
I'm trying to figure out what are the key things to keep and what to toss, or if I just start fresh. What's your experience? Like, has that happened a lot that you just started, fresh?
Sometimes you have to start fresh, but I will say this: if you just stay in Corey's POV, point of view, the whole time, and just sit there and try to figure out. Scott Frank, who wrote Queen's Gambit, was his latest thing. So he said, we saw him speak 100 years ago, and he said basically a good movie is 26 great 2-page scenes, or some version of that. And that's what it came down to. That's what it is. It's just right. If it's not giving you good scenes, then just ask why, And by the way, sometimes you're right. We do write card good scene here where this thing happens. You got to give yourself a break. You build scaffolding as you get there. They're not always going to be great scenes when you start, but just find the dynamic story, right, of this person, not this world.
And all that stuff all that work you've done is valuable. Just push it to one side of the table. Now you have the other piece of work to do, which is, who is your character and what is her story? You need to put her in hopefully a position of some kind of crisis in her everyday life that she's been leading, right? And that's where you start your story. And then some piece, whichever piece you choose of that bigger mythology, is going to come rampaging into her world and shake it up, right? And it's going to deflect her path. And that's the inciting incident of your series and of your character's life. But we're already going to know her some because we've seen her in her world.
Right.
And you'll have created some needs and wants for her, things she loves, things she hates, and then things will start making sense because we're following her and why she's trying to do stuff.
I have another short question regarding fantasy script and pilots and TV show pitches, because you talked in another episode about, having IP and that having something like written before, may that be like a novel or a graphic novel or whatever. Is it better to like sit down and write this as a novel, self-publish it and try and sell the script after? Or is it possible to like sell something like this if it's a world attached and a whole lore and a mythology?
I think you have IP. You have a Greek myth
definitely
attached
have
to it,
IP.
right? Like everybody knows something about. You can explain this piece of Greek mythology very simply and quickly to people, right? People already know it,
right?
So you've got that baked in,
and that's half of what IP gives you. IP says this is a story that made sense and other people paid for it. The other half of IP is, and there's this huge customer base that love the book and they're going to show up. And so it's a combination, and you obviously don't have necessarily, you might of the
either of that.
Right.
No, you have the first one, which is the story worked.
Yeah.
It's been told for thousands of years. So no, it works. My thing about it is the goal is not to sell this, Ellie. Your goal is to write a beautiful script that gets you hired on other shows so that you can go to TV school on somebody else's dime and build a career.
Yeah.
That's the real goal. I'm not saying it won't sell. Of course it could.
No, I didn't mean it like for this script in particular, but for generally for fantasy scripts.
I don't know if self-publishing does you a lot of good.
Yeah, I don't either. It certainly can, but it's a ton of work to incrementally improve your odds. I'm not sure.
You'd probably be better off just writing another spec script with that energy, and then have two interesting things to show people.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I mean, we've talked about this in one of our rants, but there's no surefire way to do anything. But I'd hate to write an entire. Basically, you're saying I need to build this house. Should I conquer a country first so that I can build it? I'm like, oh, maybe you just want to work on getting more wood. How'd that metaphor hold up?
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah, that
Almost.
makes sense.
Almost.
That makes sense.
Ellie, I thank you so much for calling us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It was a very interesting world, and I hope you see it all the way through.
It is interesting. Good luck.
Thank you.
And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Buddha-Rays out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Salmon Gym on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writer's Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.